Okay, we're going to take a look at the game Guadalcanal, and it was designed by S. Craig Taylor, and it was published by Avalon Hill in 1992. Now this game is part of Avalon Hill's Smithsonian Institution series, and I think they were aiming at the introductory game market. I don't know how successful they were with that, because though the games were simple, there's enough to them that it would be quite daunting for someone to learn their first war game with this one. I don't think too many wargamers play this game anymore. Actually, I kind of missed it myself back in the 90s. I didn't get it. I've only recently acquired it. There's quite a lot of components to this game, so we're going to take a look at it, give you an idea of how it plays. In many ways, it reminds me of the old Avalon Hill Midway, with its search boards. You've got your setup charts, and off screen there's a battle board. But we'll take a look at all these components and give you an idea of how the game plays. Okay, I'm going to point out some of the negative things about the game I don't like at first. We'll get that out of the way. Now, first of all, it is a simple game. So the rules are really this one sheet, double-sided, although admittedly fine print. A little fine print for my old eyes. So the basic game, that's it, just a sheet. Now here is part of the problem. If you go to the optional rules, they're in this battle manual, much like what Avalon Hill did with the old Midway game in 1964. And herein lies some of the problem. You learn the basic game, and you got the scenarios, advanced rules, and the historical commentary in this battle manual. And it makes looking up things fast very awkward. Now you've got a number of scenarios, which is good, and your historical commentary is mixed in with it. That's bad. It just makes looking up things hard. And various data on the ships, which is nice for the enthusiasts and stuff, but I don't know what kind of market they were catering to. Then you've got the optional rules here in the back, in the paragraph form with some subcases. That's the hard part. Learning the game is actually kind of difficult. If you stick to just this basic sheet, you can sort of get it. But that sheet, I may point out, is pretty basic. It doesn't explain a lot of kind of information you need. Now, veteran war gamers can figure this out, so you can get by that. That's one of my little pet peeves about it. The other pet peeve I have about it is the setup time. There's one heck of a lot of counters in this game, because you've got every air formation, all the ships, got scout planes, task forces. There's a lot of counters. And when you have to set up a particular scenario, I was working on, setting up, took me about an hour to set up one scenario. I've tried sorting the counters various ways, sorting them by ships, by dive bombers, fighters, torpedo bombers, that kind of thing. And no sortation method seems to work for setting up the scenarios fast. So what I did was, I chose the largest scenario, which is the Guadalcanal one, and divided the counters that way, put them in baggies that way. So next time I play the game, I'll at least be able to play the largest scenario fairly quickly. So that can be problematic. If you wanted to set up just a small scenario, you're still going to have to go through all the counters to pull out the counters you want. So setup time is a negative with this game. Now we'll take a look at the task force cards and take a closer look at the counters and the search boards to see how the game plays. Now the game is all about the naval and air battles that occurred around the island of Guadalcanal in 1942. And each player has its own search board. So you've got the Allied search board here and the Japanese search board there. Now in actual play, you're going to have this search board screen in between the two boards. So you of course will play not knowing at all where the enemy forces are. Here on the board I've got the Japanese bases marked, and the blue stars are where the American bases are. Your forces move in task forces, which move on the search board here. Those will be task force markers. And the actual ships are on a card, which we'll get to in a moment. So it's much like the 64 Midway. You'll be searching for the enemy task forces in complete ignorance of where they are. You'll be sending out search planes from your bases, trying to locate the enemy. So this part of the game is a lot of fun, And it's a nice throwback back to the old 64 version of Midway. Okay, we'll take a closer look at the board here. Of course, the board covers the whole area of the Solomon Sea here. And you've got Guadalcanal, or Henderson Field, way over here on the right. See if I can get that focused better. Yeah, over here is Henderson Field. Up here you have the Japanese Shortland base. Up here Buka. Up here Rabaul. Gazmata, Ley, Port Moresby, and Gilly Gilly. Way over in the bottom right, you've got Espero Santo. And there's the Santa Cruz Islands. And there's your Coral Sea. So that gives you an idea of what the search board is all about. And now we'll take a look at the task force boards. Okay, now that's what the task force boards look like. For example, you've got Espiritu Santo base, Henderson base, Gilly Gilly, and Port Moresby. And you put your planes that fly from those bases here on this card. And over here you can see Task Force 64, the battleship South Dakota, Washington, and the destroyer Flotilla 9. This is Task Force 67, which again has destroyers and cruisers. Now I've set up the main Guadalcanal scenario. This gives you an idea of how the card works. So your task forces actually move on this board here, small counters, just a name, Task Force 64 or Task Force 67. They will move on the search board. And of course these task force markers represent these forces over here on the right. And the Japanese have the same idea. Now we're looking upside down here, but that's the Japanese task search board. We'll take a quick look at the task force board for the Japanese. Now the Japanese didn't use numbers to designate their task forces. They gave them kind of descriptive names. So for example, here you have the strike force, you've got the support force, the convoy force, the attack force, and the advance force. But the same idea as the American task forces. The ships that are part of these forces are put on the board here. So there you've got the Junyo and the Hiyo, the Isuzu and the Chokai. I always like the names of the Japanese ships. Now up there on the top, I didn't show this on the American one, but that's where your carriers are, so the Hiyu and the Junyo, and on board what type of planes there are. And you would put on the board whether the planes are being armed or they're ready for flight. Now the types of aircraft, well, on the left there, F means fighter aircraft, T would mean torpedo bombers, and D would mean dive bombers. You've also got heavy bombers and high altitude bombers, medium bombers. You get all kinds of air units in the game. So the order of battle, I guess, is researched as well as it can be. I'm not an expert on this campaign, but I'm assuming Avalon Hill did their homework, and the planes and ships and stuff are fairly accurate. Okay, there we have the battle board. Nothing too exotic about that. It's plain blue, and you've got various charts on the board itself to aid when you do surface combat and air combat. Now I'll get to the battle board again in a minute to show you how a typical attack is done. It's very reminiscent of the old Avalon Hill Midway game done in 1964. And there's an overall shot of how much room you'd need to play the game. On the far top there are the search boards, of course. Those are your cards. In the middle where you put the task forces, and of course the battle board. So setting this up takes a good portion of my dining room table there. Okay, well, how do things work on the search board? Well, much like the old 64 version of Midway, that is, what you do is you send out search planes from your task forces. So for example, Task Force 16 happens to be the Enterprise, and she has two of these search markers, little search planes. And the bottom right is the range of these markers. So on the US board, he would move out these planes 6 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example, and he would be able to call out search areas as he enters each hex. So he could call out L8, K8, J7, I7, so on. And if the Japanese forces were sighted in any of those hexes, the Japanese player would have to inform the US player of the composition and type of the ships. So that's how search works. You'd send these guys out searching for the enemy. Now, once you found them, you'd probably want to mark them with a marker. Let's say you weren't sure of the size, you might want to use this 5 marker or something like that. Or you can have an exact to show you, yep, that's where I found them, that's where the enemy is. Then, in the appropriate phase, you would then launch your attack aircraft, which also have ranges on them. The bottom right figure. In this case, all of these dive bombers can move 5, and this fighter can move 4. So you'd arrange, in the attack phase, you would send your attack planes to that task force and attack it. And that's when you would go to the battle board. So there's a whole strategic game going on here and a tactical game going on the battle board. So let's set up a typical attack on the battle board and see how it goes. Okay, I've set up a very simple attack here. Let's say that task force consisted of the heavy cruiser Atago, a light cruiser Nagara, and the heavy cruiser Takeo. And let's say the American had 2 dive bombing squadrons and 1 torpedo squadron. So this might be a typical attack. The torpedo squadron will go against Atago, and the 2 dive bombing squadrons will go against Nagara and Takeo. Now the game is based on a die roll 10, so zeros, if you have a 10-sider, is a 10 in this game. And what happens first is the defender, in this case the Atago, gets to fire anti-aircraft fire against the torpedo bombing unit. And he does that by taking his anti-aircraft value, which I think is the 3rd number. Yeah, this 3rd number, in this case a 2, and adding it to his die roll. And the torpedo bomber takes his defense factor, which is 2, and he adds it to his die roll. And you see which one is higher, and various results occur. Let's do a typical roll and see what happens. Okay, I'll use the red die roll for the Japanese and the black die roll for the Americans. Roll the die, and the Japanese get a 2, and the Americans get a 4. So if you add the anti-aircraft value, 2 plus 2, you get 4. You add the defense value, 2 plus 4, 6. So the Japanese did not outroll the American, therefore the anti-aircraft fire had no effect. Now, for the sake of the video, if the Atago had rolled higher than the torpedo squadron, he would have achieved a hit on the squadron, which would have reduced the squadron's attack ability. If he had got twice as much in the die roll, he would have scored 2 hits on the torpedo squadron, which would greatly reduce its combat value. And if the attacker had scored 3 times as much as the defender would have been eliminated. So it's a very simple combat system and is common to all the types of combat in the game. Surface combat is very similar, anti-aircraft is similar, dive bombing is similar. They all have a similar system. It even is a throwback to the old Gettysburg game, also designed in this system. I think that game came out in 1988, and it uses base 10 also. So we're talking here about a simple combat system, but it does work. So in this case, we'd have the poor old Nagara right here with its only anti-aircraft of 1, and the defense here of the dive bombers is 2. So we'll roll the die, and the Japanese get a 2 plus 1 is 3, the Americans get a 3 plus 2 is 5. So again, the anti-aircraft fire has no effect on the dive bomber at all. So that's how anti-aircraft fire works. Let's see how the dive bombers do. Okay, for this dive bombing attack then, this torpedo squadron 10 would be adding 4 to its roll, and the defense of the Atago is 3. A little bit more equal. Let's see what they do here. Red die is Japanese. Okay, the Japanese roll a 4 plus 3 is a 7. Americans roll a 9 plus a 4, so that's 13. Certainly exceeding the 7, but not twice. So it would score a hit on the Atago. And there's various effects that hits have. They mainly reduce your defense and your attack ability, and when you accumulate enough hits, the ship takes the plunge. So that's the simple combat system for Guadalcanal. Okay, the surface combat is still very simple, and I'm not giving it quite justice here. you more or less set up your surface combat lines in 2 lines at a prescribed distance, whether it's night or day, and you literally just sort of bang away at each other, ship to ship. I kind of wish there was a little more to the surface combat than that. Seems a shame not to use this whole board. You've got quite a lot of board there, and yet in the end you just kind of line them up and bang away at each other. There will be some surface combat in the game. I mean, in real life there was, but surface combat, again, is very simple, as is the whole combat system. Okay, obviously there's way more to the game than I've shown. For example, the optional rules add quite a lot of things, and there's several pages of these. You've got the free roll marker. If you get a bad die roll, you can re-roll again, then you have to give the marker back to your opponent. You've got repairs rules in the game. You've got submarine attacks. There's movement options, because some ships move faster than others. They've got that built into it. Expanded launches. Air ranges are a bit more complex if you want to go moving with legs. There's wave attacks. If attacks come in from 2 different hexes, you can make them uncoordinated. And then there's a whole sub-game here by using fighters. Fighters will add a lot to the game. In the basic game, they don't add fighters. Expanded search rules. I'm not sure how much more the optional rules add. I haven't played them, but there's a heck of a lot to this game. You can see just several pages of optional rules, and there's even multiplayer rules. So that's Guadalcanal by Avalon Hill. So in closing, I don't know what else to say about this game, except it looks pretty good. I've only played it once, just one scenario, and that was a small scenario, and I want to get back to it. I don't know how often I'm going to play this game, though. It's like I said, the setup is messy. The counter's a little bit dated by today's standard, but I don't know. For its time, I guess it was a pretty good game. But it was almost designed to be out of date. It was designed in 1992, and yet it looks much like a throwback from the 60s. So if you get your hands on this game, you might want to give it a try. I don't know if it's around much. I just happened to get an unpunched copy at WBC, which was kind of fortunate, but and I'm into naval games, so I thought I'd give it a try. Anyway, that's it for Guadalcanal by Avalon Hill, produced in 1992. Thank you for watching.